The 1970s were a decade when cinema didn't just flirt with controversy. It slammed the door open, stomped inside, and dared you to look away. These weren't safe movies made for polite company. They were raw, unruly, and sometimes downright dangerous. Studio bosses couldn't control them, censors tried to kill them, and audiences lined up anyway. So, how far could a film really go before it crossed the line? You're about to find out, and some of these will still make your jaw drop. Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS, 1975. Few exploitation films from the 70s carry the same notorious reputation as Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. Shot quickly on leftover sets from the TV sitcom Hogan's Heroes, this low-budget Canadian production was aimed directly at the US Grindhouse market, and it hit like a grenade. Diane Thorne plays Ilsa, a brutal camp commandant obsessed with proving women could endure more pain than men. The result is a string of twisted experiments and ruthless punishment for anyone who crosses her. Made for about $150,000, it exploded in drive-ins and midnight screenings, pulling in millions despite being banned in countries like Australia, Germany, and New Zealand. Critics shredded it, calling it tasteless and grotesque. Some of the cast and crew even tried to have their names removed from the credits after release. Of course, the backlash only made audiences hungrier to see it. The controversy turned Ilsa into a brand, spawning sequels and cementing its place in Grindhouse history. Whether you see it as a sick fantasy or a raw time capsule of 70s boundary-pushing cinema, one thing's certain, it's impossible to forget once you've seen it. The Last House on the Left, 1972. Wes Craven's first film didn't just push boundaries, it bulldozed them. The Last House on the Left follows two teenage girls headed to a concert who cross paths with a gang of escaped convicts. What starts as a kidnapping spirals into a harrowing ordeal that shocked audiences and censors alike. The real sting comes when the tables turn and the parents of one victim serve up their own brand of justice. Made for around $90,000, this raw, grainy feature was marketed with the infamous line, "To avoid fainting, keep repeating, it's only a movie." In the UK, it was outright banned in 1974, dragged into the video nasties panic years later, and stayed banned well into the 2000s. Early screenings reportedly caused fainting, walkouts, and even illness. Craven later admitted he never expected such outrage, but he tapped into something primal. Without polished effects or big-budget gloss, the film's gritty realism made it feel like something you weren't supposed to see. Love it or hate it, it became a blueprint for revenge thrillers, and a reminder that horror can hit hardest when it feels all too real. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. When I Spit on Your Grave landed in theaters, it was met with disgust, protests, and scathing reviews. Camille Keaton plays a young writer who retreats to a rural cabin to work, only to be attacked and left for dead by local men. What follows is a relentless revenge mission that stunned even hardened Grindhouse audiences. Director Mir Zarchi said the idea came from helping a real assault victim get to the police and seeing her mistreated there. No studio wanted it, so Zarchi rented theaters himself, keeping ticket sales. Critics tore it apart, with Roger Ebert calling it a vile bag of garbage, yet it grossed over $5 million on a shoestring budget. In some countries, it was banned outright for decades. In the UK, it bounced on and off the banned list, with uncut versions only appearing much later. Its legacy is divisive. Some see it as exploitation at its ugliest, others as a raw tale of survival and revenge. Either way, it's one of the most infamous titles in 70s Grindhouse history. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre proved you don't need buckets of gore to terrify an audience. Following a group of friends who stumble into a rural nightmare run by the Leatherface family, the film's power comes from its suffocating atmosphere and unrelenting tension. Made for about $140,000, it went on to earn over $30 million in the US alone. The MPAA refused an R rating, and several countries banned it outright. In the UK, the ban stuck for decades, and they even outlawed the word chainsaw from film titles during that period. Despite showing very little blood, the constant screaming, chaotic editing, and grimy look made it feel more brutal than most gore-heavy films. Hooper's low-budget ingenuity turned Texas Chainsaw into one of the most profitable independent films ever made, and the godfather of modern slashers. Many imitated it, but few matched its raw, nerve-shredding energy. Faces of Death 1978. In an era where horror was already pushing limits, Faces of Death dared to present itself as a documentary. Marketed as a study of death around the world, it mixed staged scenes with real footage of accidents, disasters, and animal attacks. The result? Outrage, bans, and an underground cult following. Director John Allen Schwartz spent around $450,000 making it. Special effects wizard Alan Apone, later of Scarface and Iron Man, handled the fake gore, which was convincing enough to fool many viewers. Authorities weren't amused. It was banned in the UK, Australia, and New Zealand, with possession of an uncut copy even considered a criminal offense in some places. Despite the controversy, or perhaps because of it, Faces of Death became a VHS legend. Bootlegs circulated in schoolyards, and midnight screenings sold out. The taboo of watching something so forbidden made it irresistible to many. It's not for everyone, but it's a prime example of how 70s exploitation could blur the line between fiction and reality in ways that still spark debate. Fight for Your Life, 1977. Even among Grindhouse regulars, Fight for Your Life stood out as one of the most racially charged exploitation films ever made. The plot is simple but explosive. 3 escaped convicts invade the home of a black minister and hold his family hostage. What follows is a tense, hate-filled standoff that pushes every button imaginable. Banned outright in the UK in 1981, it was labeled so offensive that the British Board of Film Classification refused to even consider cuts. An uncut VHS briefly surfaced in 1982 before being yanked during the height of the video nasty crackdown. Other countries weren't any more forgiving, and even in the US, some theaters wouldn't touch it. Director Robert Endelson said he made it for audiences, not critics, and he succeeded in provoking a visceral reaction. The villains are irredeemable, the violence is ugly, and there's no comic relief to soften the blows. Quentin Tarantino once called it one of the meanest exploitation films he'd ever seen. For those who can stomach it, it's a raw reminder of just how far 70s cinema was willing to go to test its viewers. Super Vixens 1975. Russ Meyer was already a legend in exploitation cinema, but Super Vixens might be his most outrageous creation. Part violent road movie, part cartoon come to life. It follows Clint, a gas station attendant framed for murder who meets a series of over-the-top women, all played by the same actress in different costumes and wigs. Meyer financed the $100,000 budget himself and somehow convinced 20th Century Fox's indie division to distribute it, despite the X rating. The gamble paid off. It grossed around $17 million worldwide, an incredible return for a film this wild. One of the most notorious moments involves a police officer killing a woman in a bathtub, followed by electrocution, a scene Tarantino has praised as one of the most powerful in 70s cinema. Meyer described the film as a violent adult cartoon, and that's exactly what it feels like. Exaggerated characters, lurid colors, and bursts of shocking brutality. Love it or hate it, Super Vixens proved that in the 70s, audacity could be a box office goldmine. Caged Heat, 1974. Before Jonathan Demme won Oscars for The Silence of the Lambs, he cut his teeth on Caged Heat, a women-in-prison exploitation flick made for Roger Corman's New World Pictures. The setup is pure Grindhouse. A group of inmates endure a sadistic warden and a corrupt doctor until they've had enough and plan a breakout. Shot in abandoned asylums around Los Angeles, the film cost around $180,000 and grossed over $2 million, a massive profit for Corman's outfit. Demme, working with no budget, edited it himself under a fake name. The result is campy, raw, and brimming with the expected genre staples: power struggles, betrayal, and explosive payback. While it was dismissed by mainstream critics at the time, Caged Heat has since earned a cult following, even getting praise from Francis Ford Coppola as one of the best exploitation films ever made. It's proof that in the 70s, even future Hollywood heavyweights had to start by getting their hands dirty in the Grindhouse circuit. Bloodsucking Freaks, 1976. Few titles match their content as perfectly as Bloodsucking Freaks. Set in a grimy off-Broadway theater, it follows a sadistic magician and his assistant who kidnap people and perform grotesque acts for a paying audience. When it was released, critics loathed it. The MPAA slapped on an X rating, and several US cities banned it outright. But word of mouth kept it alive in grindhouses and midnight screenings, where audiences were either laughing nervously or sitting in stunned silence. Made for just $100,000, it later found a second life when Trauma Entertainment picked it up in the 2000s, adding a commentary track from director Joel Reed and even Eli Roth. Some argue it has a layer of social commentary buried under the outrageous gore and cruelty, but for most viewers, it's simply one of the most over-the-top exploitation films ever made. If the goal was to shock, Bloodsucking Freaks succeeded in ways few films have matched. Black Mama, White Mama, 1973. Take two rival prisoners, chain them together, and throw them into a jungle war zone. That's Black Mama, White Mama in a nutshell. Pam Grier plays a tough, streetwise inmate, while Margaret Markoff is the political prisoner she's forced to escape with. They hate each other, but survival means cooperation. Shot in the Philippines on a shoestring budget, the film was part of New World Pictures' push into overseas locations where production costs were rock bottom. The climate was brutal, the stunts were improvised, and Grier reportedly did many of her own action scenes. The mix of prison drama, chase thriller, and jungle warfare gave it a fresh twist compared to other women in prison films of the era. In the US, it played to grindhouse crowds hungry for action and attitude, and it delivered both. While it didn't make massive box office numbers, it became a cult hit on VHS, thanks to Grier's commanding screen presence and the constant, unpredictable danger of the plot. It's a perfect example of how 70s exploitation loved to mash genres into one chaotic ride. Ms. 45, 1979. Abel Ferrara's Ms. 45 is a gritty, grimy revenge thriller set in New York's crumbling streets at the end of the 70s. Zoe Lund plays Thana, a mute seamstress who becomes a vigilante after being pushed past her breaking point. With no dialogue, Lund communicates everything through expression, making her transformation into a cold, calculating avenger even more chilling. Shot guerrilla style without permits, the film captured the real decay and danger of late 70s Manhattan. The budget was tiny, and many of the extras were just people on the street who wandered into the frame. Ferrara, under a fake name, even plays one of the attackers himself. While it technically came out right at the turn of the decade, it's pure 70s in style and tone, raw, unapologetic, and unapologetically urban. Though heavily cut in some markets, it gained a loyal cult audience on home video. Ms. 45 remains one of Ferrara's most powerful works, proving that exploitation can carry genuine artistry without losing its edge. Mako, The Jaws of Death, 1976. Capitalizing on the shark craze after Jaws, Mako, The Jaws of Death took a different approach, making the shark the good guy. Richard Jekyll stars as a man who can communicate with sharks telepathically, defending them from exploitation by humans. Naturally, the humans don't listen, and the body count rises. Filmed in Florida with real sharks, the production leaned on the novelty of underwater stunt work and the animal connection. The plot might sound strange, but the film had an environmental streak rare for exploitation at the time, portraying the sharks as victims rather than monsters. While it never matched Jaws in box office, it carved out its own niche on the drive-in circuit. Today, it's remembered as one of the weirder entries in the 70s animal attack boom, part revenge story, part ecological fable, and all exploitation attitude. Welcome Home, Brother Charles, 1975. Jama Fanaka's Welcome Home, Brother Charles, is one of the most unusual entries in the blaxploitation wave. It follows Charles, a man wrongly imprisoned who, after his release, seeks revenge on the corrupt officials who put him there. What sets it apart is its jaw-dropping twist on how Charles carries out that revenge, a detail that became the film's infamous calling card. Made while Fanaka was still a student at UCLA, the film was shot for very little money, but still managed to get theatrical distribution. It mixes gritty social commentary with pure grindhouse sensationalism, touching on themes of police corruption, racial injustice, and survival in an unforgiving world. It wasn't a massive hit, but it earned enough of a reputation to keep Fanaka working in the industry. Today, it's remembered as a bizarre blend of serious intent and outrageous execution, exactly the kind of combination that kept 70s exploitation cinema unpredictable. Mansion of the Doomed, 1976. Charles Band's Mansion of the Doomed is a low-budget horror gem that feels like a grim fairy tale gone wrong. Richard Basehart plays a brilliant but unhinged eye surgeon who becomes obsessed with restoring his daughter's sight after an accident blinds her. His solution? Kidnap people, remove their eyes, and transplant them into her. Shot quickly to keep costs down, the film used stark lighting and claustrophobic sets to amplify its sense of dread. The victims are kept alive in a dark basement, stumbling blindly while the doctor searches for better replacements. For a small movie, the atmosphere is surprisingly intense, and the practical effects are unnerving without relying on excess gore. While it flew under the radar compared to flashier exploitation titles, Mansion of the Doomed gained a cult following on VHS for its creepy premise and disturbing imagery. It's proof that 70s exploitation didn't need huge shocks to leave an impression. Sometimes a single twisted idea was enough. Sisters, 1972. Before Carrie and Dressed to Kill, Brian De Palma delivered Sisters, a tense psychological thriller that blends Hitchcock-style suspense with 70s grit. Margot Kidder plays a model with a dark secret involving her twin sister, a secret that bursts into violence when a reporter witnesses a brutal murder in her apartment. Shot for about $500,000, the film made clever use of split-screen effects to heighten the tension, a De Palma trademark. Critics praised its stylish direction, but were startled by its graphic moments, which were uncommon in mainstream thrillers at the time. While it didn't face outright bans, Sisters pushed boundaries by mixing art house aesthetics with exploitation-level shocks. It's a reminder that during the 70s, the line between serious cinema and grindhouse thrills was often razor-thin and sometimes non-existent. The Candy Snatchers, 1973. The Candy Snatchers starts like a straightforward crime thriller and slowly mutates into one of the nastiest exploitation films of its decade. Three criminals kidnap a teenage girl and bury her alive in a coffin, planning to ransom her to her wealthy stepfather. But greed, betrayal, and incompetence spiral everything out of control. Shot in Los Angeles, the film had a gritty, almost documentary feel. Its outdoor locations, unpolished look, and unflinching violence made it stand out. There's no glamour here. The kidnappers are desperate and messy, the victim is genuinely terrified, and the heroes never show up. The ending is pure gut punch, leaving audiences stunned and critics divided. It didn't get much theatrical play, but became a cult hit decades later when home video finally gave it the audience it deserved. This is the kind of movie that makes you realize 70s exploitation didn't care about happy endings. It cared about impact. Don't Go in the House, 1979. If Psycho had been remade in the grimy late 70s, it might look like Don't Go in the House. Dan Grimaldi plays a socially awkward man who, after years of abuse from his mother, begins luring women into a specially built metal room and setting them on fire with a flamethrower. Shot in New Jersey for a small budget, the film leaned heavily on its disturbing set pieces. The metallic kill room, with chains hanging from the walls, became its most iconic image. The MPAA slapped it with an X rating until cuts were made, and it was banned outright in some countries. While it borrowed from the slasher formula that was gaining momentum, its focus on psychological breakdown and fire-based horror gave it a unique edge. Today, it stands as one of the most unsettling lone killer movies of its era, proof that late 70s exploitation could still shock audiences jaded by years of on-screen violence. The Witch Who Came from the Sea, 1976. This surreal, unsettling film from director Matt Cimber tells the story of Molly, a woman whose traumatic past fuels a series of violent acts against men she sees as predatory. Played with eerie calm by Millie Perkins, Molly is both sympathetic and terrifying, a character who keeps you guessing until the end. Shot on the cheap, the movie's dreamlike quality comes from washed-out cinematography and disjointed editing, giving it the feel of a waking nightmare. While it doesn't rely on constant action, its bursts of violence are jarring enough to have gotten it caught up in the UK's video nasty panic, where it was banned for years. Critics at the time didn't know what to make of it. Some saw it as exploitation trash, others as an artful meditation on trauma and violence. It's since been reappraised as one of the strangest, most original entries in the 70s exploitation canon, proving that the genre wasn't afraid to get weird. Deathbed, The Bed That Eats, 1977. It sounds like a joke, but Deathbed, The Bed That Eats, is a real film, and that's exactly what makes it legendary. The premise is right there in the title. A cursed bed consumes anyone who lies on it, dissolving them in a strange, bubbling acid. It's absurd, eerie, and completely unlike anything else from the 70s exploitation scene. Shot in Detroit for an almost non-existent budget, the movie mixes horror with surreal humor. The effects are primitive but imaginative, including the use of thick, colored liquids to simulate the bed's digestive process. It was never widely released in the 70s, instead circulating quietly in the underground tape trading world years later. What makes Deathbed special isn't just the ridiculous plot, but the fact that it treats the premise with straight-faced sincerity. It's an oddball reminder that the 70s Grindhouse circuit welcomed just about any idea, no matter how strange, as long as it could grab your attention. Frightmare, 1974. From the UK's Pete Walker, Frightmare is one of the creepiest British exploitation films of the decade. It follows a seemingly harmless elderly couple living in the countryside. The truth? The wife has a habit of killing and eating people who come to their home. Walker was known for pushing British censorship to its limit, and this one tested every boundary. The violence is grim, but the real unease comes from the slow reveal, the idea that someone so outwardly normal could be hiding something monstrous. While it didn't get banned outright, it faced heavy criticism from the British press, who saw it as part of a wave of depraved horror movies corrupting the youth. Over time, it's become a cult favorite, showing that not all exploitation needed chaos and noise. Sometimes quiet menace was more disturbing. House of Whipcord, 1974. Another Pete Walker shocker, House of Whipcord takes the women in prison setup and twists it into a tale of moral fanaticism. A young model is lured to a remote estate where a retired prison governor and his equally rigid wife run their own private detention center for immoral women. Filmed for very little money, Walker leaned on stark, almost gothic visuals to make the story more unsettling. There's no supernatural angle here, just human cruelty and an unshakable belief that they're doing the right thing. It stirred controversy in Britain for its unflinching treatment of punishment and abuse, but also gained praise from some critics for its suspense and atmosphere. As a final entry on this list, House of Whipcord shows how 70s exploitation could work without constant action by building a chilling world you wouldn't want to visit. The 1970s were a wild frontier for filmmaking, a decade when low budgets, bold ideas, and complete disregard for the rules created movies that couldn't exist in any other time. Some were brutal, some were bizarre, and some were just plain dangerous to watch. Whether banned, protested, or whispered about in midnight screenings, these films didn't just push the limits, they tore them down. Which of these notorious titles would you dare to sit through? Drop your answer in the comments, hit subscribe for more deep dives, and keep exploring the wild side of cinema.